Welcome back to my Campfire Friends. My name is Derek and I'll be your host for tonight's tale. Many of my stories are inspired by existing legends, but tonight's account comes straight from my own mind. Does that scare you? Maybe it should, because the story I'm about to share is not for small children. It's more along the lines of what you might find in the young adults section at your local library. Are you prepared for your bones to be chilled? Do you want to lose your sense of adventure into the woods forever? I certainly hope not. But yet, it was a sense of adventure that led this next man to a place he wished he had never gone. I call this tale the Lost Nielsen Expedition. In 1978, a bush pilot landed in a remote area near the Noga sand dunes in Alaska. He stumbled across a pile of papers and a collapsed, antique, accordion-style field camera. There were also some intact photographic plates in a waxed canvas bag nearby. Knowing that he may have stumbled across something historically important, the bush pilot gathered what he could and left promptly. The materials were given to the Alaska Historical Society in Anchorage. After translating the documents, controversy ensued. Officials didn't want the story to hurt an already stifled tourism industry, so the materials were nearly all destroyed. However, someone with access rescued what is thought to be around 30% of the original photographic plates before they were smashed. They also saved a journal detailing a failed expedition into the remote Alaskan wilderness. The journal belonged to a man known as Nielsen. The photographs were not dated, so an attempt has been made by the author of this video to match photographs with events as recorded in Nielsens Journal. The journal was translated from the original Danish, and the account reads as follows. April 1st, 1895. This is the record of Niels Nielsen. I have traveled to the Alaskan Territory to document and catalog its wilderness before it is destroyed. Prospectors and loggers have already left a mark on this land. It's my desire to travel to the interior and document nature in its untouched state. I've assembled a team of naturalists and laborers for what is expected to take several weeks. I've employed Samuel Harrington as my quartermaster. He came highly recommended, and although he is an Englishman, we have had no trouble communicating. His Danish is quite well. He recently returned from a voyage to eastern India to trade spices, and his former employer tells me that he owes Mr. Harrington a great deal of the success of that journey. I expect it will be no different with us. Birgitta Larsen has been hired to help document our expedition. She's a student at the University of Copenhagen and has experience creating images using chemical plates, known as daguerreotypes. Her knowledge will be most valuable, I believe. The brothers, Matthias and Hans Grotenberg, have been my dear friends for many years. They agreed to join me on this trip, and have even trained with some of our snow equipment on a different trip to Norway last year. It will be exciting having them along. Last in our party is a local Inuit woman, going by the name of Tapisa. The language barrier has been difficult, but she does know a little English, and we've made our intentions clear enough through Samuel. Hand signals have made up the rest. She will act as our guide. April 5th. We spent the last several days gathering supplies and acquiring 2 dog sleds. In retrospect, we may have overloaded the sleds. I would rather go more prepared and be slow than leave something vital behind in our kit. The dogs will have their work cut out for them. We made an early start out of the trading post at Koyukuk and followed the river north. We don't have any maps for this area and have been heavily reliant on Tapisa for navigation. After many kilometers, we set our first camp. Everyone's in good spirits, and we all can't help but admire the beauty of this place. Even Tapisa communicated that she is grateful to live in such a beautiful land. Birgitta stayed up late to try and capture the aurora borealis on one of her plates, but she tells me she may have overexposed it. She's still learning the craft. April 6th. We continued our journey through the Koyukuk River Basin. Wildlife is plentiful. Samuel used his Krag Jorgensen rifle to take a caribou for sport. I reprimanded him, as we didn't need the extra meat. He was quite agitated at the whole affair. His experience and expertise are useful, so I hope he doesn't prove difficult on this expedition. The geology of this land is striking. It has been shaped by ice for so many ages, leaving a wake of broken earth in its track. This far north, I expect the spring to come later than it is. Snowmelt has hindered our progress thus far, but I remain optimistic that the weather will settle back in again and ease our way. The dogs have trouble in the slush. April 10. We've arrived at the confluence of the Katil and Koyukuk rivers. I expected to make more progress along the frozen river, but an early thaw has turned the ice to mush. We've made it nearly 130 to 140 kilometers from the Koyukuk trading post. The sled that Matthias was driving nearly went through the ice entirely today. He injured his ankle in the crash, but is still as amicable as ever. It's hard to get his spirits down, and that has helped a lot. April 12th. The river turns back on itself for kilometers, again and again. Tepisa is confident she can take us over the many spurs of the river, saving us some time. The valley is full of oxbow lakes and muskegs. These bogs ordinarily wouldn't be a problem, but the warm weather has turned them to slush, just like the river. A person could disappear in an instant beneath the muskeg. Progress remains slow. April 14th. I'm beginning to suspect Tepisa has unwittingly led us away from the Katil River completely. Yesterday we traveled over the river spur and haven't returned to its waters in many kilometers. She and Samuel got into an argument about it. Samuel was ready to leave our party and head off on his own, but I convinced him that it was best to remain together as a group. April 17th. We have lost the river. My compass should have a magnetic declination of 13 degrees this far north. However, when compared against my star chart calculations, my compass readings match more closely to what we would find 500 kilometers north of here. Samuel still blames Tepisa, but she's our best hope of finding our bearings again. Another phenomenon this evening set our nerves on edge. The aurora looked much different. We shouldn't have been able to see it at all since there was heavy cloud cover, but it didn't appear in bands. Rather, they were distinctly individual light sources. They didn't dance in their normal pattern either, but more slow and almost purposeful. As exciting as this discovery is, no one was in the mood for celebration. Once we can reorient ourselves and get a good freeze at night to firm up the snow, we'll be in much better spirits. April 18th. Some of the trees have taken on a new shape. The tops come to a crown. Most have a diameter between 2 and 3 meters. They have the appearance of a cross between a deciduous hardwood and a conifer. I had Hans bring one down with an axe so we could examine it more closely. Upon further inspection, they appear to have been arranged that way and not naturally forming. They were stuck there like so many pins in a cushion, with the pine boughs jammed tightly together, holding its shape. If they are birds' nests, I have never seen them formed in this way before. Later in the day we came across our most remarkable discovery yet. The ruins of a stone tower, roughly 20 feet high, lay on the edge of a muskeg. The stones themselves appear natural and not cut, but the ruin was unmistakably laid by human hands. I've seen many volcanic formations in Europe, and this was clearly something different, laid stone over stone in a rising circle. There wasn't any doorway for entry or windows, but our whole party was in agreement that this was either made by a previous expedition we weren't aware of, or a lost culture living in the area. Tepisa has never known any other native tribes to make structures like this. The rest of the afternoon was spent sifting through the rubble, looking for other clues or artifacts. All we found was the structure itself. The shape is proof enough. Brigitte has documented all she can. April 20th. We've found the river again. Mr. Harrington and the others were overjoyed. The river is still choked with slush, but no one paid any mind. We were all glad to reestablish a sense of direction. although my compass readings remain unusual. It has been overcast for many days and I haven't yet been able to chart the sky. We established camp again just in time for a snowstorm to arrive. It battered us for the whole of the evening and all through the night. I told everyone that this would be our big break to make the river more navigable with the sleds. Alas, when the morning came, the snow melted so quickly that you could hardly tell there was a storm by midday. We were back to slogging through the slush. In the early afternoon, Samuel and Birgitta went hunting caribou. Birgitta wounded one, and they followed the blood trail for hours. When they returned, they seemed pretty shaken up. They said that once they tracked down the animal, they found the carcass skinned and partially processed. For a moment they thought Matthias, Hans, Tapisa, or I had found it first, but our camp was kilometers from where they were. Birgitta said she documented all of it, but her plates won't be developed until we return. They managed to harvest the rest of the animal and hurried back to camp. I've told everyone to remain vigilant. Since the ruins and the incident with the caribou suggest there may still be native peoples in this area, we don't want to create any conflict. April 21st. We continued our journey upriver and discovered 2 distinct mountain peaks. Tapisa is convinced we are in unknown territory, so the brothers and Samuel wanted to name them. At first they insisted that one be named Larsen Peak, but after some objection from Birgitta, they agreed with Harrington and Grotenberg peaks. Birgitta took their portraits in celebration of the discovery. She deserves more credit for the success of this expedition than the others give her. Later on, we happened upon another discovery, giant mounds of pine boughs. They were arranged in a similar fashion to the corniced treetops. The ends of the boughs faced outward, the needles packed so tightly that they appeared like so many porcupines huddled in a ball. The crew disassembled one of the smaller piles, thinking they were nests of some sort. However, they appeared unremarkable on the inside. We scouted the immediate area and found a likely den of whatever created the mounds about 75 yards away in the tree line. The entrance fell off sharply downward. The sides of the burrow were packed tight into ice, making it very slippery. Fine black hairs were found at the mouth and pressed into the sides of the entrance. Matthias was eager to take a length of rope and explore further, but we convinced him not to since the chance of injury was too great. The clouds finally broke, giving me a chance to check measurements with the stars, but the clouds set in again before nightfall. April 22nd. We broke from our following of the main river channel to explore a tributary. After 800 meters, it led to the face of a glacier. Water flowed from an ice cavern, approximately 15 meters across and 8 high. We left the dogs and sleds behind and entered. Most of the day we spent exploring the various tunnels. Daylight permeated through the thick ice above, bathing us in an ethereal blue glow. We found a shallow pond, teeming with small, beige-colored fish. Just enough bare rock was exposed to skirt around the edge and into the next tunnel. A larger room followed, containing many natural points of egress. We had to be careful to remember which tunnel we came from. The final chamber we arrived in had a waterfall pouring in from above. The falling water created a skylight in the ice. It was fascinating to think that the molens dumping into the glacier from the surface wound up in such an incredible place. By the time we got back to the entrance, daylight was fading fast. We hurried back to our camp by the main river channel. There we found our main tent in tatters. Thankfully, most of our supplies had been with us on the sleds. The scene had all the indications of a large brown bear, so I scheduled everyone for rotating watch through the night. I took the first watch, with nothing to report. However, I was able to take a reading on the stars again, and I found our position over 100 kilometers off from where I expected to be. I decided to keep this to myself until I could make a more accurate reading on a night with clearer skies. Perhaps my readings are off. Birgitta took the next watch and kept her camera nearby. Early in the morning, we awoke to a tremendous noise. Everyone startled awake, thinking the bear had returned. But instead, we watched the twilight illuminate large jets of steam, jets that rose high above the tree line. Yet another amazing discovery for us. A thermal geyser basin in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness The entire crew stayed up to watch for the better part of Birgitta's shift. We were tired, but we felt a sense of contentment as we returned to bed. We had only been sleeping for a few minutes when Birgitta called out for us to wake again. She insisted the bear had returned and was circling the camp. We checked and saw no signs of it. She told us it was a short exposure, but she likely captured it on one of her plates. It was wise to bring her along. Her knowledge is invaluable. I look forward to seeing those developed plates at a later date. April 23rd. We traveled 2 kilometers upriver and discovered a massive cache of bones. They were piled nearly 2 meters high and 5 meters across. Many were easily identifiable. Caribou and even bear skulls could be seen, but there were many other bones which we couldn't identify. Some of them appeared unnatural. The ends didn't come to sockets or a ball. They were just irregular shapes, like children's blocks. Another 500 meters further, and we found our first major megafauna discovery. 2 large pachyderms were seen hurrying away from us over the hill in the snow. Birgitta managed to get an exposure before they left. Tapisa was shaken by the experience. She contended that they weren't pachyderms at all, but something else. She failed to explain what else they may have been. She had been leading our group at the time, and did get a longer look at them than we did, but we dismissed her claims as over-imaginative. An argument ensued. After much discussion, we decided it was time to end the expedition and return with our findings. We began to travel back downstream, but I still couldn't bring myself to reveal my findings from the star measurements. I need a better sky before alarming anyone. We saw many more of the crown-tip trees on our way, which the men have come to call tapisa trees. We made our camp shortly before nightfall. I took the first watch. I noticed something circling the camp about a half hour after sundown. I couldn't make it out in the shadows, but it moved more quickly and nimbly than a bear. It didn't approach closer than about 10 meters at any time. I woke Birgitta and had her try to take an exposure of it. It moved much too fast. After 10 minutes, it left. I was left sitting in the profound silence of the forest for a while, before hearing a large crashing sound in the distance. Everyone got out of their sleeping bags and was on their feet in seconds. All of us stood with our mouths hanging wide open as enormous shadows lumbered into view. They towered high above the trees. I estimate that they were 8 to 10 meters tall. The moonlight was just enough for us to make out rough details. They swayed slowly back and forth on long, tendril-like appendages. These must have been the same species of pachyderm we saw earlier. Tapisa was right. They were something different. We couldn't see their eyes, but I could tell from their behavior that they were watching us. Our attention was fixed on 3 or 4 of them when another set of crashing came from behind us. Another creature appeared, this one much closer to us. The dogs were barking wildly. We heard something whipping through the air at high speed, and Matthias cried out. We watched helplessly as he hurtled through the air towards the large shape. Hans immediately began racing after his brother, but we held him back. After some hesitation, the creature moved as quickly away from us as it had arrived. We could no longer see or hear Matthias. April 24. We found his body 400 meters from our camp, partially submerged in the river. Hans was distraught. We were all in shock. One dog team had disappeared entirely in the night, so we knew we didn't have any way to bring his body home. We buried him under a pile of stones on the bank of the river. I offered words of remembrance. Hans was inconsolable. We reorganized our most critical supplies onto one sled and abandoned the rest along with the second sled. No one said anything as we hurried out of there as fast as we could. With only one sled, we took turns walking. We traveled until our legs gave out. They didn't say anything to me, but I could tell each one of us held a sense of dread as the sun got lower in the sky. Samuel's rifle was the only firearm in our whole company, so we took turns with it during our watches in the night. This time, it happened on Hans' shift in the middle of the night. We heard him shouting his brother's name, and the dogs were barking again. We all got up and out of the tent. None of us had really been sleeping. There was still enough moonlight to see shadows in the brightly lit snow. I could hardly believe my eyes when I first saw it. It was Matthias, standing on the edge of the clearing near the thickest part of the trees. He just stood there, looking at Hans. Hans dropped his rifle and ran towards him. We didn't have time to stop him, and we didn't really understand what was going on. After coming to our senses, we shouted for him to stop and come back. Before Hans could reach him, Matthias turned and moved into the blackness of the trees. Hans went straight in after him. We alternated between shouting and listening until we could no longer make out the sound of Hans snapping branches as he went. We called his name several more times, but there was no answer. The dogs had stopped barking. There was only the stillness of the forest. We gave up after an hour. All of us remained on watch until the morning. April 25th. At first light, we started on Hans' trail. At the edge of the clearing, his footprints joined another set. They weaved in and out of the trees, heading directly away from our camp. After 50 meters or so, the other set of footprints grew larger in size and depth. They continued to grow until they matched the size and shape of the pachyderm's tracks we had seen 2 days earlier. I did everything I could to hide my trembling hands from my companions, and we continued to follow the marks. The thick trees broke suddenly, and there was open, snowy ground for just over a stone's throw. Then, nothing. The ground fell away into a large, steep canyon. Both sets of tracks went right to the edge without changing pace. The muddy soil at the lip had broken away, and a single, slippery track was gouged into the mud. It proceeded another 30 meters down the embankment and straight into a partially frozen lake. We stared over the edge for a moment, but no one spoke. We made no further attempt to find Hans or Matthias after that. As we packed up and the day wore on, we all seemed resigned to our fate. None of us recognized the path the river now took. We are clearly lost and in danger. Samuel has taken to holding onto his rifle at all times. He stares at us with an untrusting look. Still, Birgitta convinced us to group together for her camera for what we thought might be one last time. All of us understand now we may not get back to the trading post. As the sun dropped lower in the sky, we turned from the river and tried to hide our tracks by walking on stony ground. We left the dogs tied by the river, since they made too much noise. We were 300 meters from the water before we felt safe enough to set up camp again, this time hidden in the thick forest. We all pitched in to gather fallen logs in the area and set up some low fortifications around the tent. We then retreated away from the tent and hid ourselves under a plant known as Devil's Club, a plant with abundant thorns and broad leaves. A good hiding spot, or so we thought. This time of year it was only a tangle of thorny, dried vines. For our efforts, it did nothing to protect us in the end. All had been dark and quiet for hours. We lay on our stomachs, shoulder to shoulder, and listened for anything. The moonlight shone through the trees, giving our imaginations plenty to work with, even though it was the same forest that had been there in the daylight. The dogs started barking down in the valley, so we knew our visitors were back. Would we see Hans and Matthias together? Or would it be the large creatures we had seen the night before? We didn't want to see either. Neither did the dogs. They fell silent after a few minutes. They didn't cry out, they just stopped barking. We remained absolutely still. I tried my best to stay quiet, but my breath sounded as loud as a church bell in my ears. Hardly another 15 seconds had passed when suddenly there was another whooshing sound in the air. Both Tapisa and Birgitta screamed together, and I felt Birgitta jerked violently away from next to me. They made no more sounds after that, and before I could react, the trees around us shook and a deep, rattling vibration rolled through the ground below us. The tree trunks in front of me began to move, and I realized that one of those creatures had been standing in front of me. Had it been there the entire day? I couldn't remember. I still felt Samuel's shoulder pressed against mine, and we remained silent as the creature slowly began walking away through the trees. I could make out Birgitta's camera in the moonlight and reached for it. Samuel held my arm, urging me to remain still. I grabbed it anyway and pressed the shutter. He likewise pulled up his rifle to his shoulder, but I grasped his shoulder as tight as I could, and he refrained from firing at the retreating shape. I don't know how we did it, but we remained frozen there on the ground until first light. April 26th. I felt ashamed at my reluctance to go searching for Birgitta and Tapisa. My fear was overwhelming, but these were our friends. Samuel and I searched all morning. We found Tapisa first. She lay in a heap on a grassy knoll near the river. Her thick fur clothing hid most of the damage from us, but she was gone. Birgitta proved much harder to find. We tried our best to follow the large footprints in the pine needle-covered forest floor, and finally found her, 7 meters in the air. She had been wrapped in a caribou hide and strung between 2 pine trees as if she was laying in a hammock. I found myself most disturbed by this, due to its seeming almost ritualistic in a way. She had sustained many injuries. We cut her down and buried her and Tapisa next to each other in the sand of the riverbank. Samuel and I have made no attempts to travel any further. Our last sled and dog team is gone. For all we know, if we continue down the river, whichever river we're on now, it could lead us further from where we've come from. We made a fire, and I set up the camera for another portrait. Samuel isn't speaking to me. He no longer trusts me, but there's nothing I can do about it here. I don't think I trust him. He's kept polishing his rifle for the last several hours. I know he's determined to make a stand, and I am equally as determined. If we should meet our end, I'll secure and document a proper image of these beasts with Birgitta's camera. The sunlight is fading now. We make our stand tonight, and we will fight like lions. That's the last entry of Niels's journal. This appears to be the last image taken by Birgitta's camera. Is there really still something lurking in the remote Alaskan wilderness? Or have they moved on to another location, maybe somewhere closer to you? Perhaps not. Then again, that's a tale for another time. Until I see you again, this is Derek reminding you, you're working too hard. Nighty-night. led this next man to a place he wished he had never gone. I call this tale Welcome, my Campfire Friends. My name is Derek, and I'll be your host for the new series, Campfire Friends. I call this tale The Car That Drove Through the Canyon and Ruined the Shot. It can make you see or hear things that aren't really there. Or are they? One young ruler had his entire reality You doing your guard dog thing or what?